Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing well and staying safe during this time of quarantine. So, to begin today, I want to ask you guys just one question, and that is, do you know what gerrymandering is? If you do know, that's great, but if you don't, that's kind of why we're here. So, the definition of gerrymandering, it's a bit of a long one, but I can kind of summarize it as in that gerrymandering is just a way and a practice that kind of makes an unfair advantage for certain political parties or groups to align districts so that they can possibly get more votes, and and it kind of makes a way of unequal representation in certain states, districts, pretty much anywhere in the country in USA. And that is all caused by gerrymandering, and so that's what it means. So why is it used? It's used mainly to manipulate districts so that one group is less represented in politics. Sometimes if one group is really compacted, like let's say a lot of areas vote, solely Republican or solely Democrat, then a way to gerrymander that group is to kind of separate the district into two, like cut a line straight down the middle, and that way you are kind of separating their big voting power into two and making them less impactful in elections. And so politicians may use gerrymandering to ensure that they can stay in office and pretty much just give voters of an opposing party a disadvantage. And this can even be used in school zones and districts like that, just to, maybe for people who are impoverished. And really, it just can be used all over. So, how is it used? So, in a political standpoint, there's two ways that gerrymandering can be used. Cracking, which is diluting the voting power of an opposing party supporters across many districts, which is the example I used before, talking about how you can separate up their voting power by putting them all in separate little districts, possibly lining districts up to where a big hub of one party may be right there, and so you can just cut through there and separate that big power into two now. And so since you have to win a district, and it's kind of winner takes all, if that district is, instead of 80 or 90%, now only 40% of that, party, now it's way less likely that they'll win. And packing is the opposite way of doing that. So instead of diluting that party support, you can actually just pack it all in. So this may be common in like states that have only one or two really big cities. And sort of areas that maybe vote one way compared to another. And what you do is you just kind of compact all that voting into one area. So that way only one district will be in one party, and then all the other ones will be in the other, even though maybe the actual population is like 60-40. So it just makes it look really uneven. And this has been used by both Democrats and Republicans for many, many years. So there's a first example here is in North Carolina. Some of you might have even heard of this because it's so close to home, actually. But in 2012 election, Republicans in the state received a total of 49% of votes statewide, but in fact, they won 9 out of the 13 possible seats. So you can see the top there. I think that was actually the 2014 one as well. It shows that because there's actually 10. But you can just see just kind of how weird the district looks. I mean, you can see like a little blue sliver in there, which is very, very long and not really based on like area at all. And now it also shows how it could have gone completely the other way. Let's say instead of, in this case, some Republican legislators happen to make this kind of map, it could have been Democrats. And in that case, you can look at the second one on here and see how they could have possibly won 9 seats. If you took, instead of making it, in a Republican's favor, then Democrats would have actually 9 votes instead of 4. But if you did it, maybe in a more nonpartisan way, hypothetically, then it actually could have been really, really even in the state. And this just shows how redistricting and making like district lines just so important, and it really just makes elections, it just really impacts them a ton and shows that the population and the percentage of voters that might vote one way or another can really sometimes just not matter. So there's other examples as well of this. In Pennsylvania, on the top graph right here, the graph shows that about Republicans in the state won 50 to 55% of the votes, but won about 75% of seats. And in Maryland, pretty much the same thing. They won about 65% of votes, but ended up winning about 85 to almost 90% of the seats, which is just massive. And you can see the clear difference in the votes cast, which usually the votes cast, it is pretty like 50-50, maybe 60-40. And sometimes in these states that maybe have been gerrymandered by legislators, you can just see that it's completely skewed one way or the other, possibly for one party, like Republicans on the top one, or Democrats like on the bottom one. Just showing that really both parties like to use this for their advantage. So, what does this mean? I mean, pretty much it shows that America definitely has an issue with gerrymandering, and they like to favor themselves, whoever is in power, whenever these districts are made every 10 years. And so whoever's in power at that time, whoever gets that lucky, is then able to, legislators are allowed then to redistrict the areas. So they might do it in their favor. And even though the evidence of gerrymandering is clear, they're rarely punished for gerrymandering. The Supreme Court never really punished North Carolina for that, even though it was pretty blatantly obvious that they did, to some extent, gerrymander. So the bottom line is that people should be equally representative in any area of a state, and there really is no good reason to let legislators who have a bias make a district. But in fact, even though there are possible solutions, it's very difficult to make them because there's really no perfect way to make a district. So there are a couple possible solutions, and that could be that elections could be completely democratic without having any voting districts in a state. And those would work really well, maybe in presidential elections or in governing, possibly like in, people going for governor of a state or obviously president of America. It would make a lot more sense just to win a state than to win certain districts in a state and make it more unpopular vote. That way that every vote counts the same. The one issue with that is that politicians, let's say in South Carolina, a politician could possibly only visit Columbia, Charleston, and Greenville and really not get a majority of the state and only go to those three really, really popular areas and then win the whole election just because he or she went there. And so that's the main issue with elections that are based on popular vote, is that people who are possibly out more in the country don't get near as much representation when this happens. Now, another solution that could be done, that's still, both these solutions, I believe, are better than our current situation, which is allowing legislators to make their own district lines every 10 years. But areas that could be redistricted by someone who is not affiliated with politics at all. So maybe a pretty much just nonpartisan, no political affiliation kind of group that would just come in every 10 years and make these district lines based on possibly population of, like size of a district, or possibly just location. Make them pretty evenly sized and give them a certain amount of seats with that size. And so that way there's a lot less bias in there, but there's still representation for each area of a state. So it's not just the big cities that are getting all of the say. So the only downside is that, it's somewhat random, which means that even if someone, who was completely nonpartisan went through the state without looking at anything and was just drawing it based on location, possibly people could still be underrepresented in some areas and overrepresented in other areas. So, in conclusion, gerrymandering causes votes not to carry the same weight. And that's a big issue in politics nowadays. And that there are many examples of gerrymandering in even like the last 10 years. And it is mainly used just to make sure that politicians in that party can be reelected. The solutions are far from perfect, but at least they are favorable and have some promise compared to what we're using now.